It's the final hour of the Bold Republic Radio Show. My name is Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. And usually we do this on a Thursday, but we're going to head all the way up to the North Pole, down to Cheyenne, Wyoming. What's the difference at this point, Maureen?
Well, actually, it's not that bad here. It's pretty warm. It's quite snowy, but the snow's not sticking on the ground.
Oh, okay, because I was getting video from people showing that Cheyenne, Wyoming was just getting pummeled, and also Casper as well was just getting, just buried down there. But so you're able to actually look outside and see stuff?
Yeah, hey, I walk back and forth to work, go home for lunch. Oh. It's no big deal for me.
Okay, no big deal. Well, then again, you're from Canada. Don't listen to her. She's from Canada. She can handle it. This actually, Maureen, fits, I think, this kind of weather right in with what we're about to talk about. And by the way, thanks for doing this for us, because I was looking at the research and I thought, who better to take a look at the story that I found. The Casper Star-Tribune is where I found it. Apparently, the revenue that the state of Wyoming was expecting out of wind turbine power is down, about 15%?
Yeah, and we would think, wow, a 15% reduction. That must have been awesome. Yeah. And the amount of media hysteria that created in the mainstream media would really sort of make you sit up and think, just what exactly is going on here? But if we take a closer look at, and I took a look at the data as you mentioned, we'll see that this was really much ado about nothing.
Okay.
But the point, I think, is that what we can see is these. If you think about a wind production tax as an alternative revenue source, so increased taxes on all these other things is an alternative revenue source. What becomes pretty clear from this story is that it's not going to make up for out-of-control spending.
Right. See, my first thought is when I thought, well, wait a second now. They put up a certain number of wind turbines, and they were getting a certain amount of tax revenue out of it, but all of a sudden there's a 15% decrease. So, either the wind blew less or people are using less electricity. So how do you get a decrease like that?
Well, first of all, we should say that Wyoming is the only state in the nation to actually impose a tax on wind production or wind farms in the state. The federal government actually gives a $23 per megawatt subsidy to wind farms, but Wyoming taxes a little weeny bit of that back, $1 per megawatt hour on wind farms in the state. Now, if you look at the actual production, you'll see that it really fluctuates quite a bit. Now we've got to remember that this tax only just started back in the 2013 legislative session. So we had a little bit of tax revenue in 2012, about $2.6 million, and that rose to about $3.8 million in the calendar year 2013. That went up again to $4.4 million in 2014. And now essentially what's happened is that the revenue has fallen back to 2014 levels, and it's about $3.8 million for 2015. So you've got, what's that? Not even $1 million reduction in tax revenue that created a massive hoo-ha. It must have been a slow news day in Casper. That's all I can say.
I guess. Okay. I wonder about this because not only have we put up all of these turbines all over the country, and I've done stories, Maureen, about entire fields of turbines in California that are just basically dead. They've fallen apart because once the subsidies ran out to continue repairing these things, nobody repaired them anymore, and therefore no energy, no revenue being generated. So here you are right now with a storm blowing across Wyoming that covers these blades in snow and ice, making it difficult for them to turn if they can at all. Just the time that you would love to turn on your heater and have some of that juice, they're unable to provide it with. And I worry that Wyoming could wind up with fields filled with dead standing wind turbines once the subsidies run out.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. If governments foolishly continue to subsidize these so-called renewable energy sources, now you can see how the production actually fluctuates quite a bit between about 165,000 and 618,000 megawatt hours really per month between since about 2013. That's when the tax started. Annual production roughly matches tax revenue, so you have about roughly between 4.6 and 3.8 million megawatt hours of production between calendar year 2011 and 2015. But, given the reduction in the minerals industry activity, we would expect, as you say, to see a continued reduction in the wind production tax revenue as well, because, of course, as the economy slows down, people use less energy, but really, it's just so minuscule, the amount of tax revenue. Because if you compare that to the severance tax just from oil producers alone, you're looking for 2014 at 4.4 million, but it's 336 million from oil producers, 348 million from natural gas producers. Now to be fair, wind tax revenue did beat out sand and gravel, which generated...
Well, yeah. And if you've lived in Wyoming long enough, you know that sand and gravel blows around a lot better than those wind turbines do. Just look at your car. Jeez.
Oh, yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
So, all severance tax revenue is about $1 billion in 2014, and here we've got this big hoo-ha about 4.4 million. So, but what this really shows is that so-called renewable energy won't support the spending of a bloated government, and it could in fact make us worse off. And this is what you alluded to earlier, and we're seeing right now this happen in China, where the government has stopped all wind farm construction because they've got so much wind farm construction and so much wind energy production that they've been wasting so much of it. And it's also actually damaging their grid. Because it's I don't understand these environmentalists. They seem to think that this is sort of the be all and end all. But you got to remember that wind doesn't blow all the time, and a lot of times when it's blowing, you don't actually need the energy. If you're asleep at night and the wind is blowing like mad, you don't need all the energy. So what happens is that something has to happen to that energy. Wind energy can't be stored, so either those turbines have to be turned off, or the energy kind of goes into the grid and creates all kind of damage on the grid, and this is what they're finding in China. So they've essentially stopped building more wind farms there because of all the problems that it's causing.
All right, now
it's costing more.
Let me catch you up to speed on something that they do here in the United States, which solves the problem that you just mentioned, but then creates, of course, another problem. Because the wind never blows at a steady pace and sometimes doesn't blow at all, when it does blow, they want to capture that energy. So next to the turbines, next to where they have a wind farm, they build a massive building, and they jam a bunch of batteries in there. Now, where do those batteries come from? Rare earth minerals, which are toxic to create. And then when you've got to get rid of the batteries because they wear out, they're toxic to dispose of. So you've just created toxic waste to make the batteries, toxic waste to dispose of the batteries. The idea is to store the energy there, and then you can dump it into the grid evenly when you actually want to use it. So solve one problem, but create a bunch of toxic waste.
That can't be cost effective. That has got to be really, really expensive. And,
yes.
Of course, that just adds to the expense of these renewable energy sources. And this, the United States and Canada also are very, very far behind Europe and some other places in sort of this whole global warming, renewable energy hysteria. And the cost of electricity in Europe is so high that just yesterday, Tata Steel, which is a big, actually Indian from India, steel company that has set up quite a few facilities in the United Kingdom, has said they're going to leave the United Kingdom because, among other things, they've got this renewable energy mandate, so they have to use so much from renewable energy, which is far, far, far more costly even than natural gas, that they just can't afford it, and they're looking at killing about 40,000 jobs in the UK because they just can't afford to produce there anymore.
Yeah, speaking of killing, I started a little commercial here a little while ago for bird-free skies, because you own a nice car, you own a classic, and you know what it's like when you park your car somewhere and birds are nearby. What can happen to your paint job? So that's just annoying. Then they wake you up when you're trying to sleep late on a Saturday. So what we've done is started this program to encourage more wind farms to be built, because right now in North America alone, they're killing about 500,000 birds a year and about 800,000 bats a year. So apparently we need a lot more, in order to save your paint job. But let me ask you this. In a state like Wyoming, which provides so much coal energy, the government doesn't have to subsidize the coal industry because it's just profitable. It just is. Well, after they've dumped federal money and state money, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the same thing, into these wind turbines, do they ever turn out literally enough energy to make up for that cost?
I've never actually done the math on that, but I would seriously doubt it. I mean, the reason that an industry would need a subsidy is because they just can't make it without it. They don't produce something that people want enough to be able to cover their costs. And then when those subsidies go away, then so does the industry as well often. I mean, the federal government has often talked about getting rid of that $23 per megawatt hour subsidy, and you can see how wind farm construction fluctuates with sort of the talk about whether those subsidies will continue or not. You know, wind farms are a little bit like what I like to call subsidy farms. So when the subsidies are high, you're going to see more and more production. When the subsidies are low, you're going to see less and less production. And then, of course, as you mentioned, as these wind turbines start to break down, and especially when you've got a place like here in Wyoming, and right now around here, we've got wet, heavy snow, and it's going to freeze, and when that builds up on those blades, and if anything happens to the sort of the little computer inside the wind turbine if it doesn't turn off when it's supposed to, it'll keep on going, it'll go off balance,
Maureen,
and the whole thing will just explode.
I got to run. Thank you for all your work. I appreciate it. Maureen
You're
from
welcome.
Wyoming Liberty Group.